panel discussion on routing security to be moderated by my friend George Michelson of INNOG3. Mr. George Michelson, are you there?
Hello, yes, I am. And thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to talk with my friends from the Indian routing community. So for the panel, we have 4 speakers who are going to be talking with us. 3 speakers, including myself, 4. We have AJ Sharma from Bharti Airtel, AS9498. We have Maheswaran from Tata, AS4755. And we have Amit Tank from Reliance Jio, AS55836. Now, to me, these 3 are a really interesting representation of the big end of town, but also of the complexity of BGP and routing in India, because we have a major mobile segment telco that also has significant fiber to the home and does a lot of wholesale market routing. And we have the international transit specialist everybody is routing behind. And we have the clean build, greenfield mobile segment with dual stack, lots of customers, but not so many downstream. And each one of these brings a different quality of the BGP security problem to the table. So, without more ado, let's dive in and talk about BGP and routing security. And what we're proposing to do here is to have a talking heads chat between us without slides. And if anything that we're saying sparks a conversation between us, we'll invest the time. But otherwise, I've got pre-prepared questions for each of the panelists, and we would welcome all of you, the INNOG participants. Please dive in at any time if you have a question or if you have something to add. So first of all, let me introduce the panel. So AJ, are you there?
Yes. Hi.
AJ from Bharti has 15 years in support. He's worked in NOC, he works in provisioning and design. He worked on traffic engineering in ISPs and on MPLS, and he's worked with over-the-top network providers as well. And he's currently working in RPKI and BGP policy. Mahesh, are you there?
I'm there. Hi, Jay. Hi, everyone.
Hi. So Mahesh has 20 years in networking tech support, working in NOC and network engineering, and 13 years at Tata working on IP, MPLS, and SD-WAN. And he is also actively involved on network security, RPKI, route origin validation, and DDoS mitigation. And lastly, we have Amit. Amit, are you there?
Yeah, hi. Good afternoon, everyone.
So Amit Tank from Jio has worked in networks for 20 years, in NOC in support, and done BGP in core and in enterprise. And he has a BGP security focus and has been exploring RPKI and ROV. So I'm going to pose questions to each of the panelists, and remember, please dive in if you have a question you'd like to ask or some contribution that you would like to add. So I'm going to kick off with Amit. Amit, Reliance, about 380 to 400 V4 prefixes and about 195 V6 prefixes. But you do a lot more V6 than V4, don't you?
Yes, we do. We are predominantly IPv6 network, and we are the largest IPv6 deployment. So almost 95% of our mobility volume of traffic is on IPv6.
Now, I don't want to minimize your problems because I know the reality is every ISP has problems, but you have a deliciously simple network, don't you, compared to many other networks in India?
Yeah, I mean, since today our focus is mostly mobility, but yes, we are now getting into the broadband space as well as the enterprise space, and the scenario would soon change.
Ah,
So,
so
today maybe we are not a transit network as Tata, but very
but you never
shortly,
know for the future.
very shortly we will be becoming a transit network too, and we will have our own problems then.
Oh, yes. So as a stub network, you have two roles that you have to perform here. There's the declaration outwards of the secure state of your origination, that's getting your assets signed, and there's the route origin validation. Could you talk a little bit about how you're approaching both of these, please?
Yeah. So today what we are doing is that we have some operational processes in place wherein we verify the prefixes through the IRR databases, primarily the RADB database and the AppNIC database.
Yep.
And in future, what we intend to do is we intend to deploy RPKI, which we have already started the testing phase.
Yep.
And we have deployed a test setup. We got connected to all the RIRs.
Yep.
And we downloaded the database and compared the routing table and the route states, that is the invalid state or the valid state or unknown state. So
do you see a lot of difference between the expected routing that is declared and the reality that you're receiving? Are there things that concern you there?
There are, but we haven't got into details as yet. So we intend to do that, and presently we are in a deployment phase and the planning phase.
So we already have two questions, and one of them is very strongly about IPv6, which is a little off beam with a security story, but it's nonetheless an interesting question. Are you seeing significant growth in IPv6 coming into you? You have CGN and V6, so you have the capability to handle both, but are you seeing a predominance of V6 or a rise in V6?
Yes.
That's a question from Jagender Singh.
Yes, we are seeing that adoption of IPv6 is increasing day by day. And as far as our own network is concerned, from the mobility and the broadband space, we are a complete dual stack network.
Yep.
And we prefer V6. In fact, the TCP stack itself prefers V6. So the predominant traffic that is carried onto the network is V6. As well, we have dual stack peerings with all our upstreams, may it be peers, may it be bilateral, or may it be transit, or the caches also. The CDNs or the caches that we have deployed in the network, they all are dual stack.
So I'm going to interrupt you there because we have another question which does come back to RPKI from Subramanian, who asks what percentage of routes on the internet can be verified in RPKI? And if it's not 100%, will it be effective? So from my perspective, overall, we're seeing somewhere around 15 to 20% of all the visible routing is now capable of being validated in RPKI. Do you see similar numbers?
Yes. So I think the adoption has to be done by everyone in order to increase this percentage. And at least people have to do the ROA creation for their own prefixes.
Yep.
So that the people who are actually deploying the RPKI infrastructure, they will be able to validate those prefixes.
So I'm going to throw things over to Mahesh now to see what perspective Tata brings to the table. Mahesh.
Yeah. So from Tata standpoint, right? Sorry, to say something. Yeah. From Tata standpoint, it's pretty much same, right? 17 to 20% is what that's not going to be different, by the way, right? So, and of course, right, we are taking the big steps to go on the promote AROA, and we have been already doing it for all our peers. And customer standpoint, we kind of started currently, and with the infra as well, right? That's some work which is being going on right now.
So it looks like you are still in quite early stages in deployment. Can you talk a little bit about Tata's long-term plans for the balancing between IRR and RPKI? You have very small pockets of address that are covered by ROA, but you have a very large address space. You have 2,000 V4 prefixes that are part of your core announce. So you have quite a lot of work here.
Of course, right. So, 6453 being our upstream, right? I mean, there is a India network, there is international part of it, right? So, on the international side, we have been already starting it much earlier, right? So, we are better positioned, right? That way, we are still protected. And of course, India, there is a long way to go, right? So, that work is pretty much, on very, very active, right? We are very serious about it, right? There is a lot of work which is going on. Right
now. From what I have seen, INNOG3 recently has been publishing statistics on uptake in RPKI within the South Asian continent. And India is still quite low in those statistics overall, isn't it?
That's right. So one is, more of awareness. Some of this, forum, of course, is going to give a lot more visibility, knowledge to the end customer, right? So I certainly see uptake, of late, right? At least last 6 months, there is a good uptake, within India. That's a, a good sign, right? And we are also traveling towards it.
So recently, there was a quite disruptive event in the visibility of Indian routing. It's actually a problem in my services, but you were one of the networks that had a lot of centrality in dealing with the consequences of those addresses dropping out. Could you talk a little bit about the kinds of things you do when you see huge variations in routing like this? Did this come through your NOC? Were your downstreams speaking to you about problems?
Of course, this is all going to come from the NOC, right? So, if I remember right, it's on 12th August and 13th August, to be very precise. And there was a change which is done in APNIC and Japan, route registry, which actually, kind of triggered a lot, turn in the BGP, right? Obviously, there were some issues with respect to a set update, right? With the moment we started push towards network, it's like a bump, right? So that's eventually kind of sorted out almost 2 hours, right? I would also like to you to throw some right on what exactly happened, right? What sort of remediation taken from the other side of the table, right?
It's quite simple. We had a crude interface that didn't have enough clarity around what a selection field was in a GUI. And we'd also excluded some of the change update logging because people were complaining that they were getting snowed with emails. And unfortunately, the selection option meant someone accidentally selected all of the nets, and then the deletion option, they didn't get mailed a notification that would have warned them something terrible had happened. So we've taken it on board. The software needed work. And so we've immediately applied 2 changes. We've removed select all. And that does mean for people in the situation of doing a lot of filter changes, they're going to have to do a lot of manual interaction. But until we can redesign the system to prevent this, it's not a good idea. And the alert is going to be mailed. And if people are feeling like they're being spammed, they're just going to have to deal with it, because we need to let you, the ISPs, know when system changes happen in us that are going to affect your routing integrity. And I assure you, from the bottom of my heart, I am extremely sorry for the disruption we caused to the Indian routing service. So you continue to use IRR quite heavily. Do you see a time in the future when you might stop using IRR and prioritize RPKI?
Okay, so one, of course, RY is going to help to surface the problem, right, and the larger extent, right, based on the adoption, right. The biggest problem are the other major dependencies, path validation. There is, I think, at industry there is a lot of there is a lot of work which is going on, right? Till that time, right, we'll have to still rely on the IRR or PSL, right?
Yep.
Once we get to the stage where, okay, this is the time when we can kind of, auth validation also taken care, then it's a good time to start.
So I'm going to go now to AJ at Bharti and
Hi.
bring his perspectives to the table. AJ, Bharti
Yes.
Airtel, big established, complex networks, many downstreams. You're huge in mobile, you're across wholesale, and you are also in the top 25 worldwide on NIST for RPKI. Well done.
Thank you for this. As per the our leaders' vision, that in the first stage we were thinking about the IRR routing, how we can stop route leaking or hijack of our routes. So
Yep.
when we heard about this RPKI, we found that this is a good thing that we can deploy in our network and guide our customer to stop route hijacking, because in the Indian perspective, we can see that there we can found there lot of route hijacking or something by misconfiguration. The route hijacking is done by Indian ISP service provider.
So if I just come in there, we have a question from Jagender Singh asking about how small ISPs can implement RPKI. You're the upstream. Typically, when a small ISP using you in bulk and wholesale talks about this, what are the first things they have to do?
For a small ISP, if they ask us how they can implement such kind of thing in their network, we are my sales team, my different project team just guide the my small upstream service provider how they can deploy, how we can help them to integrate these kind of services, because it helps them and it helps us also, and it helps community also if we deploy the RPKI. This is my belief that if we all deploy the RPKI, it will definitely stop route hijacking.
So there are also various options in terms of routing hardware. And one of the problems recently has been that the smaller ISPs are often using equipment that isn't fully enabled for RPKI. I think I heard that Microtic recently released their first train with RPKI. Do you know of other packages that are available that people could be using?
No, that we have not heard about this. We were working on the system with RPKI, where we can revalidate or our system with RPKI RIPE system, and then deploy this validation onto the router.
Yeah. So we have a suggestion from someone attending INNOG. There's Stavros Patinotis, who says if you're a small ISP, you should look at using Octo RPI and ExaBGP. So you also continue to use the IRR system for your filtering?
No, we were last 2 years we were starting using this system as a POC. But when we heard about RPKI, our total focus goes to the RPKI, and to check these kind of validation what we receive from IRR, we have deployed some small system in our routing table. For example, we have two kind of customer in our system. One is prefix based, the customer who has a limited prefixes, and they just ask to allow these two prefixes or these two prefixes into the network to browsing the internet or to reach into the network. And some of the downstream customer who has the AS path based filtering. For those AS path based filtering customer, we have deployed some AS path based routing in our system. It's not as per the full of the IRR routing table, but it will protect my customer to announcing the route leaking or something like that. For example, if I have a customer and I have a peer, and if customer is announcing the peer route, I have the mechanism in my router to stop that route, not receiving that route from that customer.
So we have a question from Mahesh Nair asking how you would get RPKI implemented in a multi-homed small ISP environment. And I have to say, from an outside perspective, I have been discussing with APNIC training people and with others this question, because a common situation we see is that people will implement RPKI on one peering relationship, but still functionally have default. And you're not really protected if you do that, are you?
In that scenario, we just guide to the customer that you just make the root object, and then with the help of the RPKI, make two validation, whether you are announcing that prefixes with two AS number or not. Am I right? Is it answer your question?
So I think with multi-homing, the problem is certainly more complex than when you're a stub network singly homed. But if you're not engaged in having to make a lot of routing complexity and you do have a default route, you're going to have to think about the implications if you want to implement ROV, because you may acquire accidentally visibility of routing outcomes that you didn't expect. As to signing your own assets, I personally think everyone should do it. So even if you're not doing ROV, you need to make the declaration forward. Amit, if I can come back to you, you are going to be in a state soon where the whole of your network footprint is signed?
Yes, we are going to do that. So as you said that maybe smaller ISPs may not think on ROV, but at least they need to do ROA. So that is the first stage that everybody needs to do. So yes, we are going to do all our ROAs for all our prefixes.
And Mahesh, if I can ask you a question, in that role you have of forwarding packets for everyone, are you actually able to drop origin, or are you not potentially in a situation that it's harder for you to do the dropping?
No, we do the drop, invalid packets, right? But we do a lot of pre-assessment, right? Before we even, we go and drop, right? This is something which is already happening, right?
Right.
As far as the invalid concerns, we are dropping it. As I said, right, we have been already dropping about 1900 prefixes, which is all, of course, it's all invalid prefixes, right? But, whenever we go and take the decision for the customer, then we like to be more mindful in doing that, right? So because some of this, complex requirement, right, dual homing, right, DDoS, there are many other scenarios where, this is likely to cause issues.
So,
George, can I?
Yes, of course, please.
Mahesh, can I ask you whether doing a local preference initially would be a good option before dropping?
That's certainly an option, but the moment you decided, okay, this is not at all a valid prefix, right? I mean, that confirmation, that is where a lot of background analysis assessment that happens, right? Of course, that's an option, right?
Yeah, thank you.
So, is there a lot of out-of-nation routing going on? Do you have the problem in the Indian routing community that sometimes people aren't friendly and packets flow over the long link? Or are things mostly happening domestically? How does that kind of situation arise?
Let me answer this. Being an Indian ISP, we all three members are connecting with each other, as well as we are connecting with INNOG3, so that all the traffic routed from one ISP to another ISP being the part of Indian routing, rather than it goes to somewhere else, Singapore or US, and then coming back to India. So we are in a relationship so that the traffic can be routed domestically and it will not go outside the India.
So,
good. So you've got a good sense of the boundary. Sorry, please go ahead.
So I agree. I mean, all the bigger ISPs in India are connected to each other, as well as we are connected to INNOG3. So all the domestic routes are being exchanged either bilaterally or through the exchange. And hence the tromboning effect that you mentioned is very minimum.
Well, this is good. This means you've taken up the message of keep local traffic local, which I think is good. But it still means you have an attack surface inside India amongst yourselves. So even though you don't have risks of packet flows outside the country and you aren't exposed to path attacks in some ways because you have good local short routes, you still need RPKI for that domestic protection.
Yes, definitely. That is required.
So we have a question from the floor, and I'd like to remind everyone, do please send questions in if there's something you'd like to discuss. Jitendra Singh is asking if all three of you are sharing all of your routes at the NICSI peering.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we are.
Short and sweet. So there is a background question here, which perhaps comes back to the problem that we had in APNIC. You all depend on an intermediary to provide you with RPKI services, because currently there isn't a mechanism for you to do this directly for yourself. Do you think part of India's long-term future is going to be having a service in country that can help you to implement RPKI? It feels to me that you need direct control of your own routing fate. What do you think about this?
George, I will go with this. I certainly agree that that's really is going to help us in big way, because today it's a trust and care point of view, right? Only 5, right? The moment you build something out of India, right? So I see a lot of value, right, in getting. Yeah.
Well, we have good bilateral relationships with IRIN. They're a sister of ours. They're part of the RIR framework. They're an NIR, and I'd love to help them to develop a service in country to help you build your own RPKI solutions. Some of you probably continue to have other assets coming into your control. Not everything is easy in a global network and may not vest in a single RIR. So I suspect ultimately you're going to have to operate a service inside yourself to run RPKI. Have any of you explored using the software system like Krill to do your own signing?
As per Bharti concern, still we don't have test such kind of things. But we are requesting to Erin, please come into this picture and give us guide how we can do it and how they can help us to make such robust system, so that we can at least have one backup with Erin and one backup with my own system.
So Mahesh, let me ask you, could you imagine moving to more aggressive route dropping in RPKI rather than just going to unknown? So you think that this has potential to become a reason not to accept traffic rather than to put it in the second consideration bucket?
Right now, of course, we are not going to reject all the customer prefixes, right? That is where, we are more mindful, right? But otherwise, pairing standpoint, we have been doing it, like I said, right? So we are, in terms of the overall ROA percentage as well, right? It's still 17%, right? So once you kind of, gain more momentum towards, more and more ROA, and right, then, I think we'll have to take the call according at later stage.
So I'd like to remind people, please ask questions if there's something you'd like to raise or discuss here. We have a few more minutes.
I have one question for you, George.
Yes.
So as Mahesh said that the ROA percentage is 15 to 17% max. Can APNIC play a role in increasing this percentage by encouraging all its members or having some kind of policy wherein this ROA percentage can increase?
So I'm going to answer that in 2 parts. We have a huge outreach initiative that we conduct all the time as part of training and community support and development. And we have been quite successful in some communities with raising the profile of RPKI as a focused activity. So something to think about here is taking something like INNOG and deciding to make one of your workshop themes deployment of RPKI, perhaps at the end of a 2 or 3 day training. And that means that you can then have some focused activity and have people in a room together to bring RPKI live. My friends in South America like to joke that one way you can do things is to get all the ISPs for a country in a room and then lock the door and don't let anyone out until they've deployed RPKI. I think it works in smaller economies. I'm not sure it's going to work in India. The second part of your question goes to the policy question. And it's a really good question. If you felt that there was a positive policy signal that you as the Indian community want to see in address policy, if you want requirements, that's a community decision that you are free to propose and bring to the table. I can't tell you that the global community is necessarily going to agree, but the whole point of the public policy process is that you can bring these ideas forward and we can test them against what other people think. So if you wanted to make it a requirement that you have to have a visible plan for network security in RPKI, talk to Sunny Chendi from APNIC about formulating a policy proposal and see where you can go. Now, we have another question from Ramkrishna Pariya. He's asking for the tentative timeline for Tata and Bharti Airtel to start doing RPKI validation. So Mahesh, could you talk a little bit about that, please? And then AJ?
So as I said, right, the effort is very, very active, right? Just to give a perspective on the timeline, right? At least, max of, 6 to 9 months is what I could see right now.
Mm-hmm.
And as per the Bharti, we have tested our system and we have deployed this RPKI validation on the 2 or 3 customer. One is a prefix based, another is a BGP based. The testing successful, and in next 6 to 9 months, we will deploy this kind of thing on all the customer what we have.
So we have a question from Jabastin Daniel. How small ISPs using Microtic can take part in this move? You're going to have to upgrade to a newer release to see whether their RPKI implementation is functional yet. We have a question from Jitendra Singh asking if we can elaborate on the process of deploying RPKI in an ISP network. Do you have downtime requirements, or is there any dependency on the peering community? You would have to bring your peering up and down to bring up a new state across the peering, or is it totally independent? Do you need to refresh your adjacencies when you enable RPKI?
No need for that, because RPKI is a parallel process. You need to deploy one server, communicate with write, communicate with the signature of the routes, and then this particular server will communicate with your router. There is no relationship when you are deploy the RPKI validation on the route on the customer side or the peering side. That peering will be go down. This is just a validation. You can put it and test it. How many route you are getting valid, how many route you are getting invalid, and after that you can take a decision. But I need to be do a drop or I need to be pass it. There is no fluctuation on the peering or services side when you are putting that.
So when you start looking at a deployment like this, something I heard Amit say is that you've been looking quite carefully at the variation between the implication of RPKI and the actual BGP that you see. Do you have a formal decision process you go through to look at something like this and say this is having too much effect on the variance of the network? How are you going to arrive at a high confidence position about the effect of this on what you're doing?
So as Ajay said, that initially what we intend to do is deploy the validator software, integrate with our internet routers, and then see the state of the routing table. How many invalids we are seeing, or how many unknown we are seeing, and the action taking part will be done post internal discussions and deliberations, and how much can we do, how much we cannot do, what we can do, what we cannot do. So that is going to be a process wherein all the stakeholders in the organization will be consulted, and then that decision would be taken.
So we have a question.
So one thing I just wanted to add, right? So
please go ahead.
sorry. So one thing I just wanted to add, right? Whenever we people create ROA, right, we'll have to be more careful about, right? It's not really for the more specific prefix. I have seen, the very longest prefixes on that, right? So that's something we'll have to make sure, right? If they can do some, proper aggregation at, provider level, that's going to be, good for us, right? Otherwise,
Yeah. And definition of
making
the
it more
maximum prefix
specific
length will be very important in that
Yes,
case.
the max length is an interesting question because many people look at RPKI and this facility to say in one sentence, here is my prefix, here is the max length I want to allow. And what they don't realize is that if you are not actually announcing all of those max length objects, you're creating a potential security hole. Because if someone originates on your prefix and more specific at the max length, it's going to be seen as legal. And even if it has a path way out somewhere else, it's going to be a short, longest prefix match wins. So there's a path attack in having max length too far from your prefix and not actually routing it. So when you're doing RPKI, please people, make sure that you only adjust the rower to fit exactly what you're doing on the network. We have a statement, a question from Rajesh Panwala. In recent days, an issue was reported in the local registry. What are the chances of similar instances in RPKI, especially the validator server? So Rajesh, that is a good question because a lot of people think that they can go to an external validator and use that external validator as a source of trust for what they're going to do. And a quite large American network that I'm not going to name did this using someone else's validator, and then their network connection to the validator died. So don't outsource your validation. If you're running RPKI, you need validation inside yourself. The problem in the local registry we already discussed earlier, which was an operating error, unfortunately relating to services that I run. And again, I apologize for that effect on the Indian routing horizon. We've already taken some action to try and remediate things there. So before we finish, do you have any last words you'd like to say to your friends and colleagues in the Indian routing community about RPKI? Amit.
So what I would like to tell the Indian community is that yes, RPKI is going to be very important for all of us to ensure that our prefixes are not being hijacked by anybody else, or we are not misconfiguring our routers accidentally and unintentionally creating a routing loop or some kind of route attraction or traffic attraction towards not the actual destination. So this is one of the important piece that we all need to look into, and we need to deploy as soon as possible. Maybe RPKI may not be the only solution, as Mahesh also said that BGP AS path validation is going to be another important factor, which will definitely come in future. I mean, it's there, but may not be in the right shape that we may want to deploy it now. So I would urge the Indian community to have a look at RPKI and include that in all our roadmaps so that we are compliant.
AJ, any last words?
Yes, yes. I just go through this. I just want to say that now BGP is not a single routing protocol that we are thinking. It's a protocol that you can increase your customer experience of and to make that experience happy and always be in a good shape, we need to go with RPKI so that we can save ourselves from route hijacking. And one more thing, I am expecting that that in future with RPKI we can do the path validation also, so that it's a full fruit thing that we can save our network and provide good services to the customer also.
And Mahesh.
Okay, I think first of all, thank you for this opportunity, and we are going through the very tough times, right? Both personally and professionally. right? We must do ROI, as simple as that. Thank you, everyone.
And I would like to say thank you to everyone for this opportunity to talk amongst ourselves and for your questions. And thank you for staying safe and looking after yourself and your customers in the global network. Take care, people.